In August of 2021, I heard some devastating news. A former student of the school I worked at, as well as a daughter of one of our teachers and a sister to one of our students, had passed away. Now, Taylor was young. Taylor was also involved in high school clubs, was a cheerleader, and was a great student. She was also a tutor to some of my current students. So to hear that she had committed suicide was devastating. According to the CDC, the second most leading cause of death in children between the ages of 10 and 14 is suicide. So today, we're going to be discussing suicide in children. We'll be talking about what suicide is in children, what its symptoms are, and how to prevent it. So first and foremost, what does suicide in children look like? To start, suicide is caused by injuring oneself with the intent to die. I know this seems morbid, but it's the truth. Children could use multiple methods to commit suicide. Some of the most common methods are overdosing, hanging, or using a firearm. Now, the CDC conducted a study from 2000 to 2020 where almost 1.5 million children had OD'd. This was on prescriptions, over-the-counter medication, or anything they could get their hands on. 68% of that 1.5 million was female, and the other 32% was male. This averaged to about 63,000 children a year. Out of that 20 years, 1,005 children had died. Some causes that could be causing children to commit suicide is undiagnosed and untreated mental health. What we know is that anxiety that is left untreated causes depression, and depression left untreated can cause suicide. So it's important that we give these resources to these kids to develop the proper coping skills. So now that we have explored what suicide in children is, let's discuss some of the symptoms. So some symptoms to think about is ideology and ideation, self-harm, and then we'll talk about the 7 warning signs of those things. So suicide, ideology, and ideation is the festering of suicidal thoughts. Now, this is a misconception that children act impulsively. Actually, they don't. They think a lot about some of the actions they make. Sometimes they rethink about a situation that could have gone differently. The truth of the matter is, children actually think before they do. It may not always seem that way, but that is the case. A most recent study by CDC that was just released in March found that 22% of high school students in 2021 had seriously considered committing suicide, while another 18% had made a plan for suicide, a complete plan. That's hard to hear, especially as a high school leader and for a future teacher, to hear that many kids of the entire United States has either considered or built a plan. Next, let's talk about self-harm. According to Hilary LeBeau with the Psych Central, it can be difficult to define self-harm. However, children use self-harm as an emotional release. Their coping skills are underdeveloped because their brains haven't fully developed, so they use it as an out. However, some of these self-harm issues can be seen as cutting, which is the most common, scratching, hitting, biting, burning, and picking at their skin. So now that we've discussed ideation and ideology and self-harm, let's talk about the 7 warning signs. Michelle Silva, a certified therapist with the 180 Center of Lodi, had a depression and suicide seminar in March. So the 7 warning signs are, first, talking about the future in a poor and hopeless tone. They talk about it in a sense that there's not going to be a future. They don't like how the future is going to look. So they just have a negative connotation with it. Social isolation, sometimes we separate ourselves, but when you notice that there's further isolation than just what's normal and healthy, that's when to take into concern. Giving away possessions, it may not seem like children would have many possessions, but a journal, their favorite bracelet, a necklace, something they wrote, that holds value to them, so that's something that they would give away. Risky behavior in children, it's kind of hard to find that because they're not driving it, but anybody who's 14 to 18, they're learning how to drive, or they already have been driving, and so that's where you have to take into consideration, are they driving safely? And so really watch those behaviors. The fifth one is seeking ways to die. Again, we talked about the self-harm, that kind of falls into that category. The sixth one is talking or writing about suicide, in a sense where they're writing poetry, writing a song, journaling about it, or saying it outright to people, like just out of the blue start talking about it. And then last but not least is threatening it. They say, I hate my life, I just want to die, I'm going to die. I know this seems really hard, but it's the truth. Now that we've talked about the symptoms, let's talk about prevention. So Ritu Chatterjee with NPR had written an article about how the 988 hotline has now been live. They created this hotline because the original phone number was far too long for anyone to use in case of an emergency. It needs to be short and simple, so that way when there is an emergency that arises, it's quick and fast. Therapy and treating the mental health. I can't emphasize this enough. It is important. There are plenty of resources here at Delta, in Lodi and Stockton, that are more than willing to take in your child and talk to them. And you can also become certified a mental health first aid responder. The 180 Center in Lodi is holding a training and certification class March 21st and 20th. So if you're interested, take a look at that. So in conclusion, we talked about and learned about suicide in children. We talked about what suicide is, what some of the symptoms are, what to look out for, and prevention. According to the CDC, the second leading cause of death in children is suicide, especially in ages 10 to 14. In 2020, 581 children died from suicide. No one expected Taylor's death, not even her closest friends. Taylor was a stellar student, she was a great athlete, she was a sister and a daughter to her parent, and she was a friend. But the most important thing was that she's young, and it should never have happened. Thank you for your time and listening to this speech.